Hello, my name is Tina Childress, and I'm going to be presenting to you all today about simple language for complex topics. So I'm going to speak the rest of this presentation. I'll let the interpreters do their job. I am an educational audiologist. I am also a late deafened adult, and I work in Champaign, Illinois, where I work in the mainstream school setting, and I also work as a consultant trainer for the outreach program for our state school for the deaf. So, one of the things that I've learned in the 20 years that I've been an audiologist is that it doesn't matter how much information we know if we aren't able to convey that information to parents. So hopefully, this will give you kind of a taste of things that you can think about and the way that you say things and the words that you use. So when I work with children, and sometimes when I'm working with adults, I have to tell it kind of like a story. Like there has to be a beginning, a middle, and an end. Because when you do that, then it's not just a whole bunch of information and they're waiting, to know what's coming next. But if you tell it kind of like a story and you use visuals, all of that is always going to be very helpful for families. It helps them remember, kind of like solidifies it in their mind. So think about, what kind of resources do you use? So luckily, a lot of the hearing aid manufacturers and the cochlear implant manufacturers already have resources available. There are lots and lots of books about kids and adults, role models with hearing loss. So I highly suggest that you look up books with, deaf characters, hard of hearing characters, and see what's out there. I think being a professional, whether you're an educator or you're a clinician, one of the things that happens often is we get stuck in jargon, right? We use all these acronyms because we use it every day, and after a while, you don't even realize that you're doing it. Well, when you're talking with families, or sometimes even when you're talking with your colleagues, that jargon can get in the way of conveying what you actually want to say. So, what kind of jargon can we see? So, think about an IEP meeting. Right there, IEP, Individualized Education Plan meeting. Especially in the deaf and hard of hearing world, there's all kinds of jargon that we might use to describe different kinds of hearing loss. Some people will describe it in dB. We will talk about like HAT, hearing assistive technology, RM hat, remote microphone, hearing assistive technology. And so we just, need to be cognizant about trying to avoid doing that and talking to parents. So, what kind of stuff do parents want to know? What kind of information do they need? Well, if you are going to be working with a child for the first time, or you're identifying a child with hearing loss for the first time, there is so much going in their head, and there's been studies that have shown that they forget most of it the first time. But at the same time, when you ask parents what they want, they say, give it to me all. And I think, from talking with parents, they say they want it all because they need to hear it again and again, just like our kids. They need to learn new vocabulary, they need to learn new concepts, and they need to hear it again and again. So that's what we have to do. I love the saying, tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and learn. And I learn. And so think about, how do you teach your families how to troubleshoot hearing aids? Are you able to have a demo hearing aid? Now in the time of social distancing and, e-learning and all of that, it's been a little bit more difficult. Luckily, there are resources out there like, videos and YouTube and things like that. But, when we are able to all get together again and we can show them, the little pieces, or we can even do it via, like video conference. You can Zoom with a parent and kind of walk them through it. That can be very, very beneficial for them. So think about the audiogram. How do you describe the audiogram? It can be a very confusing thing. So the way that I like to describe the audiogram is I say, okay, as you go across the top, when you go from left to right, think of a piano keyboard. So you have the low pitches on the left-hand side, and then as you go across to the other side, that's where your treble notes are. As you start at the top of the audiogram, it starts out very, very soft, and as you go down the page, it gets very, very loud. The yellow thing in the middle, we call that the speech banana. And all that means is that's where a lot of the speech sounds are located. So you can see some of the lower pitch or frequency speech sounds, and you can see some of the higher pitch speech sounds. And so sometimes what we'll do is we will plot the audiogram, right? An unaided or an aided audiogram on one of these things. And you have to be careful about it, because if you notice, when you look at the speech banana, do you notice how the SH sound is at like 40 dB and it's just a little bit over 2000, like, 2200? Well, then parents think, oh, so if my kid is not hearing at that level, they're never going to hear the sh sound. Well, that's not true. What this graph actually represents is it represents the main energy for that sound. But the sh sound can actually span a bunch of frequencies. So they may not hear that particular frequency, but the energy of SH might also be present and maybe a lower frequency, like 500. So, they might be able to hear the sound, but they may not be able to, tell the difference between the sh and the s, the S sound. Okay? So be really careful about that. The other thing that you need to think about with an audiogram is that an audiogram only tells you the softest level that you hear a sound. Okay? It doesn't always tell you what happens with medium, like normal conversational speech, or really, really loud speech. When that happens, different algorithms in your hearing aids and your cochlear implants kick in, and it can cause, something a little bit different to happen. Sometimes it'll get compressed. Compressed just means that it doesn't let the sound get too loud, but when you compress a sound, sometimes it can make things sound distorted. Okay? The other thing that we need to help parents understand, that just because they hear the sound, it does not always mean that they understand the sound. So that's something that I wanted to make sure to hammer home. The other thing is if you look at two audiograms side by side, they look exactly the same, but the kids may be functioning very, very differently. So for example, with me, as a late deafened adult with cochlear implants, if you compare my audiogram compared to someone else's audiogram, I can talk on the phone. I can understand speech without lip reading sometimes. Whereas my friend, her audiograms looks exactly the same, but because maybe she had really limited benefit from her amplification in the beginning, maybe she got implanted later, she's not going to be able to do the same things with the same information that we're getting in our ears.
The American School for the Deaf is proud to sponsor the National Deaf Education Conference, which has created the NDEC Signs and NDEC Engage series this year. During the pandemic, we need to be creative and thoughtful about how we reach our communities, and NDEC has done that for our instructors, administrators, and parents. Thank you.
So one thing that does tell audiologists, how hearing aids might perform in different loudness levels is this kind of complicated, scary graph. We call this the speech map. And so we have a way to connect the kids' hearing aids to a device, and then we can actually measure how their hearing aid responds in their ear to different loudness levels. Okay. And so we can make sure that things aren't too loud, that we make sure that even for soft speech, that the hearing aid is set correctly. So, and the beauty of this is the kid doesn't have to respond. Everything is kind of measured, but all that tells us is what they can hear. It doesn't tell us what they understand, right? Because all of that information needs to go to the brain and get processed and use auditory memory and closure and decoding and all of those things. And every kid is a little bit different. For me as an audiologist, when I talk with my teachers of the deaf and we're talking about results from a hearing test, to me, this information is more important. We want to know, how do they do with their amplification or without their amplification? Also, how would they do with RM hats, so remote microphone? So like giving a teacher a microphone, how much does that help the kid? And so just to kind of go through what all of these things mean, SRT means speech reception threshold. It's the softest level that a kid hears. We want to see that level about the same as where their audiogram looks unaided, with the X's and the O's, where they raise the hand when they hear the beeps. As an educational audiologist, our focus is, how does a kid do in the classroom? So when we do measures, what I do is we always present the sound at 50 dB. Well, why 50 dB? That's the average loudness of a teacher's voice in a classroom. And so, it doesn't matter if the kid's only getting a little bit of benefit or a lot of benefit. We want to see, because we want to know, compared to kids in their class, how much information might they be getting. So I like to do it in different conditions. I always like to do it in quiet, aided and unaided, as well as with remote microphone technology. Plus 5 SN, what does that mean? So that stands for plus 5 signal to noise ratio. So the signal is 50. So then it's going to be plus 5 over the speech. So that means speech will be 45. So 50, 45. So the speech is going to be a little bit louder than the noise. And this is often where we see kids really struggle. And this is where we see, is the hearing aid helping them, or the cochlear implant? How well does the remote microphone system work? Other conditions that I like to try to do, especially if there's time, is to do it not only just listening only, but like listening and with visual, like speech reading cues. And to compare those things, because that information, I can take that and say, okay, teacher, this is why Johnny has a really hard time in your class, because I've noticed that, sometimes you will turn the back to the class and you keep talking. Johnny really, really needs to see your face. And when he's able to see your face, then he doesn't have to work so hard. He's able to understand more. So for me, this kind of information is most helpful. The other thing that you want to look at is, when you look at visuals and the things that you use, which picture do you think that you would use? It depends, of course, on the context. It depends on the age of the person, if you're talking to an adult or a parent compared to a young child. And so, sometimes things can be overwhelming. So you have to think about, how are you going to describe how hearing works? So one of the things that I have my audiology students do is I say, you have some tasks. I want you to explain how hearing works, how a hearing aid works, a cochlear implant, a bone-anchored hearing system, and remote microphone technology. I want you to think about exactly the words that you're going to use. Okay, now I want you to write it down. So then my students write it down and they keep tweaking it. And then I say, okay, now I want you to call a family member or a friend that doesn't know anything about audiology. Were they able to understand it? Think about how many different ways that you might describe conductive hearing loss or sensory neural hearing loss. To the average person, those words mean nothing. That's all part of our vernacular. We talk like this all the time, but we have to be really careful when we're talking, especially to parents, to use terms that they can understand. So, talking about how a hearing aid works, one thing that I like to stress about hearing aids is that the microphone is up here at the top of the ear. This means that when they wear headphones, it needs to be down. It needs to be up here, not down here. Sometimes I go into computer labs and the kid says, "Oh, I can't hear." Well, that's because they have the microphone in the wrong place. For cochlear implants, kind of the take-home message for that is you want to help parents to understand that when you get a cochlear implant, of course, it's not going to be automatic. It's not going to be a cure. And the kid is going to be most successful if they're wearing their device as many hours a day as they can tolerate, if they're getting therapy to help them make sense out of what they're hearing. When I first got my cochlear implant, I said it was like this whole new language. And so, we don't learn a language overnight. It takes, like hours and hours and weeks of practice to become fluent. So, to become fluent in CI takes practice. It needs to be taught. To this day, there are still sounds that I hear. I'm like, what is that sound? But once someone tells me what that sound is, I'm like, oh, that's what it is. For bone anchored hearing systems, I think one of the most important things to talk about with these is care and how to keep it clean, especially if they have the abutment, that little post that kind of pokes through their skin. We don't want skin to grow over that. So, when you're talking about, how this works, make sure that you definitely mention how to keep it clean. For a remote microphone system, the thing that I like to talk about with this is the fact that the microphone on the teacher is this far away from their mouth. So it's like being this far away from a kid's ear. I kind of freak out kids when I say it's like I'm sitting on your shoulder, and they're like, what? But the advantage of this is that it doesn't matter if the teacher's right in front of you or if the teacher's all the way across the room. This distance from your mouth to your microphone is going to be the same. It's going to be louder than any background noise, so it's going to be clearer. It can overcome, those challenges when there's lots of people talking at the same time. So, those are the kind of things that I like to do. Think about how would you support your story? Or what happens if you're trying to teach your student how to advocate for themselves and to tell their story? Do you use social stories? I have, with everybody having a phone in their pocket now, it's really nice to just like pull it out and make a quick video, or take some pictures, and then it's right there and it's actually their device. It's not some stock image. You can make social stories, there's lots of different tools that are out there now. The other thing that I think is really important for kids with hearing loss is to understand and know the name of their device. I know many adults that they don't know the name, the make and model of their hearing aid. I'll be like, what kind of hearing aid do you have? They'll say, oh, I have a Phonak. Well, what kind of Phonak? They can't say, I have a Phonak M50-13. So think about our students and think about our families, especially now, with distance learning. And if they have to go to the internet to find something, they're not even going to know what website to go to. They're not going to know what processor or hearing aid model to look for if they're looking for a user manual. So, knowing how to find that information and to share it with the family is very important. What I have included for you also are some sound simulations because I think that they can be very powerful. The one on the top is a sound simulation of what it's like to hear with and without a remote microphone system in a classroom setting. I like to pull this out sometimes at IEP meetings to help teachers kind of like, get it and to be able to hear it. The one at the bottom is just, it's a Flintstone cartoon. And so you'll hear Fred and Barney, playing this game. And it starts out with a normal, they call it normal hearing. And then you have a mild, and then a moderate, and then a severe hearing loss. And so for parents, sometimes being able to hear that makes them go, oh, okay. So my kid has a mild hearing loss, which I don't like that term because it makes it seem like not a big deal, but it is a big deal. And when they hear that sound simulation, they go, oh, okay, I get it. That's why if I say Johnny, I can say his name and maybe he'll turn, but then he'll be like, what? I don't understand what you said, right? Hearing does not always equal understanding. So with that, I hope you learned something and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.